The European Union is an organization that hasn't even existed for 25 years, and yet under its control, multiple countries have entered into recessions and even depressions. Entire countries' economies have collapsed. These include Greece, Portugal, Ireland, Spain, Italy, and France. Though the unification of Europe is a noble idea, I, like many other people, are Eurosceptics. We're skeptical for many reasons, but to state our argument more simply, I'd say we're skeptical because the European Union hinders the economic performance of the individual nation state. More so, the EU's domestic and foreign policies are counter to what the European people desire. These policies include immigration, war, free speech, expression, and privacy. The European Union is a complex system. Thus, criticism of them is equally complex. So please read up on our academic sources, and please look at all sides of the argument before making a decision. Be informed. There are some benefits to the European Union, by the way, but it's certainly not good enough. I'm Jay Feza from the Rebel.media, and let me explain to you why the European Union has and always will fail Europe economically. The European Union is a powerful collection of economies. They're all not the same, though. A number of economies in the EU significantly outperform others. Germany, for example, has the largest population in Europe, so naturally, they'll have a bigger economic output than, let's say, Ireland. But also, thanks to German vocational and academic systems, Germany usually has a more industrious workforce. The point I'm making is that ultimately, not all countries are equal. Some countries are better than others in an economic sense. Thus, if the European Union wants to help the mid to low-size economies in social programs or infrastructure projects, the EU redistributes money from the larger, more efficient economies in the European Union to the smaller ones. For instance, if Greeks wanted an early retirement age or Belgium an art museum, money is pooled from countries like France, UK, and Germany since they couldn't do it themselves. As you can imagine, this causes internal political tensions in the EU. The French, British, and German people rightfully don't want their money to be the backbone of the European Union's social benefits that everyone else is enjoying but them. Thus, the EU sought to look westward, towards the United States, specifically the US commercial markets. And EU investing in copying the United States housing market signaled the end of the European Union's financial stability. The financial crisis of 2008 affected the European Union more so than the United States, even though the crisis began in the United States. While Congress used portions of money to fund real estate and housing development in the poor regions of America, the Bush administration financed the war in Iraq by simply having the Federal Reserve print off more money. The newly printed money was then loaned out to the government. When you print more money than you need, though, it has the effect of devaluing the purchasing power of your currency. That is to say, the more you have of something, in this case money, the less it's worth, and the less it can buy. Thus, the price of houses rose through inflation, not by real value. On the surface, it looked like the US housing market was increasing in value. In reality, the US currency was actually decreasing in value. So how does that affect the European Union? Well, for starters, the European Union bought billions of stocks and bonds from the mortgage bundles in the US housing market, thinking that they were solid investments. Also, the European Union copied the US model of real estate and housing development by printing new money, reallocating the money to poor regions of Europe, and, most damning of all, loaning out the money to poor people who couldn't afford a home so that now they could afford a home. To avoid Southern and Eastern Europeans' high interest rates, a majority of banks use foreign currencies like Japanese yen and the Canadian dollar. Then, just like the United States, the EU banks bundled up the mortgages and then sold it to other banks in the international market system. So, to summarize, under the socialist ideology of helping the poor and less efficient economies by reallocating newly printed money, giving out more loans, and selling poorer people new homes, the European Union invested their entire future on the fraudulent US and EU housing market. A housing market that was bound to crash. Why was it bound to crash? Think of it this way. All money is debt. Money is always from top to bottom loaned out to people and must be paid back. So who's going to pay for the newly printed money? Who's going to pay for the mortgages that all these people can't afford? And who's going to pay for the debts that are accumulated from all these failed investments? No one was going to pay for it. And that's the point. Once the banks wanted their money back with interest, it caused a domino effect where several markets froze, currencies plunged, and entire countries entered into economic recessions or depressions. In other words, the EU crashed. However, the United States' crash had less of an impact on the European Union than Greece's crash. This is important to understand. If the United States' economy crashes, that doesn't mean Canada's economy will crash too. But if a single nation like Greece crashes, that will affect the entire European Union. Why? Because they're all within a single market and they all use the same currency. Alas, Greece's economic problems are Germany's problems, even though in terms of economic output, these two countries are entirely different from each other. The EU treats them the same, even though they're clearly not. If Greece's housing market crashes, that affects Germany, even if Germany had nothing to do with it. Spain's economic problems are France's problems, Italy's problems are the United Kingdom's problems, and so on. So, what was the solution the EU bureaucrats had to solve the problem of unequal economies in a single market system? Socialism. Socialism and a bunch of stupid investments in a fraudulent banking system. Hey, how did that turn out? The last 20 years was a test for the European Union's financial stability, and they failed. The financial crisis of 2008, more so than anything else, revealed the importance of national sovereignty to the everyday person. It revealed the importance of a nation being able to fully control their own economy. Yes, the single market has its benefits. Corporations can now sell and distribute products more cheaply. People can use the same currency to buy goods anywhere. However, the downsides are clear. The German, French, and British people do not want to be the backbone of European socialism. Also, just because a few countries economically crash, that doesn't mean the rest have to. So what's the solution to the European Union's inherent problems? Simple. Get rid of the problem. Get rid of the European Union and the EU bureaucrats. Austerity, as in cutting social benefits, won't solve your problem. Taxing the rich won't solve your problem either. Nothing the EU does will solve the problems they have because they are the cause of their own problems. Only when you become the individual nation states you are, as in you control your economies, you control your trade, and you control your nations, will you be free from the shackles of financial failure. You won't be economically burdened with the socialism and the economic negligence of other countries. But if you continue this, Europe, well, you know what will happen. You'll crash and you'll burn yet again. I'm Jay Feza from the Rebel.media. If you're a Eurosceptic like me and you don't think it helps the European people, like and subscribe to the Rebel.media.